Welcome to another episode of the Girl About the Globe podcast. In this podcast, I'm joined by Sally Jane Smith, author of Repacking For Greece, to discuss solo travel in Greece and everything else solo travel. If you're planning a trip to Greece, this podcast episode is for you. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Girl About the Globe, a podcast for you, the solo female traveller, empowering women to travel solo with maximum adventure, minimum impact.
Welcome to another episode of the Girl About the Globe podcast. Today I'm joined by Sally Jane Smith, author of Repacking For Greece. Sally joins me to discuss Greece and everything solo travel. Welcome, Sally. I'm really excited to have you on today, so thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Lisa. I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and I'm really excited to be the one that's chatting to you today.
Oh, great. But before we dive into Greece, tell us more about your own personal solo journey and where it all began.
I've been traveling solo now for, I think my first solo journey, truly solo journey, was to Tunisia, and that was back in 2000. So that's 24 years of solo travel. And it's really my favorite activity in the world is to travel by myself. I do have a partner who's very understanding about the fact that I don't invite him along when I go traveling. He has to come with me, but he gets it. He gets that I need that time alone. And in fact, these books that I wrote were really about reclaiming that solo travel after 10 years when some circumstances in my life led me to stop traveling to adventurous destinations.
That's great that you have an understanding partner, because I think some people wouldn't understand why you would just want to go off alone. But I think having that alone time in solo travel is so important. Why is it important for you?
Part of it is that, part of it is having alone time. But it's also, I believe that you experience a country in a very different way when you're traveling solo. You experience the country differently, but you also encounter yourself differently, so that a journey becomes not just a journey geographically, but also an internal journey. When you're traveling with a partner or with family or friends, your attention is on each other, both in positive ways and in negative ways, right? So, I mean, positively, you have these fabulous experiences of sharing what you are discovering, laughter, all those kinds of interactions. Negatively, you might be having, resentments or frustrations because people aren't doing things the way you would like to do them. Sometimes it's not even that you resenting others, but you're afraid they might be resenting your decisions and perhaps your mistakes, because we all make mistakes when we travel. I've made quite a few. When I'm with somebody, I'm so worried about what they'll think, even though they might not care at all.
That's so true.
I'm so worried about that. Whereas when I'm alone, I just seize the opportunity to discover something different. So what if I got on the wrong train? Who knows where I'll end up?
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I kind of feel a bit of pressure when I'm traveling with someone because I've traveled solo so much. I feel as though I should be getting it right all the time. And if I do make that mistake, like getting on the wrong train, or because things do go wrong when you travel, don't they? It's not all completely seamless, but I feel like a bit of a failure, and I feel like they're judging me because they must be
Yes.
thinking, but you travel so much, how come you just got on the wrong train? Or but it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't matter when you're by yourself. It's an adventure.
Exactly. And they might not even be judging you. But if we
Yeah.
have that in our minds, then that already colors the experience for us.
Yeah.
And whether it's these positive or negative experiences of traveling with people, the fact is that we are distracted from the experience of traveling.
Exactly.
So when we are alone, we're not looking at each other, conversing with each other. Instead, we're looking outwards. The people we're conversing with are the people we meet on our travels, whether they be other travelers or people who live in the country, who might not come over for a chat if we're with somebody. I've had amazing experiences, for example, in Turkey. I remember sitting in Turkey waiting for a dolmuş. Now, dolmuş is I don't know if you've been to Turkey, Lisa.
Yeah, I don't remember a
Okay.
dolmuş.
So the dolmuş, they are the small minibuses that run. They kind of
Oh,
like taxis, I guess. But they run on set routes, and that you might have 12, 15 people sitting in the dolmuş. And I got the time wrong. My Lonely Planet was out of date. I landed up at this bus station, sitting there with dolmushes pulling in and out, and I had hours to wait. And what ended up happening is that everyone took care of me. The old men called me over and offered me tea, and the fruit seller walked past and dumped a whole handful of cherries in my lap. And, the children
oh.
came over to see what I was doing. Now, if I had been with somebody, I don't think that those interactions would have happened, because we would have been talking to each other. We would have been focused on each other, and people wouldn't have felt that desire to take care of us.
Yeah, I think you're definitely more approachable when you're by yourself, and that's when you can have the best interactions. I love that. I love the fact that she just put cherries in your lap as well, and everyone was looking after you, and you remember that. Yeah.
And she did it twice. The first time I thought, oh, was
Oh,
I supposed to pay her? And on her second round, she did the same thing. I got another handful of cherries. It was a lovely moment. And of all the places I went to in Turkey, and I have many incredible travel experiences from Turkey, it's that day that I remember the most. That's the day I think about. And yes, if I hadn't got the time wrong, and if I hadn't been alone, I wouldn't have had that
mm,
experience.
meant to happen, maybe.
Mm.
How did you find Turkey? Just talking about Turkey, because I know that some women are a bit worried about traveling to Turkey by themselves because of the stares of the men, or they don't quite know how to dress there. How did you find it?
Turkey is a full travel experience for me. I spent 7 weeks in Turkey.
Wow, that's a long time.
It was at a very emotional time. My niece, who was the other nomad in my family, um, she had died in a
Oh,
in a travel accident
sorry.
when she was in Vietnam on a scooter. So um, I had already booked my ticket, and I was, do I stay home or do I just go? And I went. I couldn't stay home. I couldn't go. I couldn't fly to South Africa for a funeral. I couldn't do that. I ran away, and I went to Turkey instead. And I spent 7 weeks traveling through Turkey, and traveling not just in the more touristy areas. I went into the hinterland of Turkey, to places where, one place that I went to, I saw one other person who looked obviously non-Turkish in the full 3 days that I was there. So I really was traveling away from the resort areas. I never felt a moment of being threatened in that time that I was there. I was looked after. I found the people very hospitable. Now, having said that, anywhere you are as a woman traveling, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of your surroundings, and you have to be, um, I think, listening to your instincts of
Definitely.
whether you're getting into a dangerous situation or not. I don't do a lot of going around at night, but honestly, I found Turkey one of the places I felt safest, and Greece is another one of those places that I felt safest. And it's interesting because there is this long history of interaction between Greece and Turkey, and it
Yeah,
is not a it's not a friendly history. It's something, Greece is the country, apart from my own country, South Africa. Greece is the country that is the closest to my heart. Um, but I also experienced this amazing hospitality in Turkey. And then when I look at the history of these two countries, it's really hard to reconcile that. It's really hard to understand, because there was so much brutality, particularly that the Greeks suffered at the hands of the Ottomans through hundreds of years of occupation, and in Asia Minor with the population exchange. And I'm getting into sort of some quite political territory here, but my experience I would say to somebody who was concerned, don't be concerned. It's probably much more dangerous just wandering around in the city that you grew up in, for many of us, than it would be in Turkey. But just, yeah, everywhere you go, keep your wits about you, be aware.
That's good to know. But I do also think it is important to know about the political side of the country that you're traveling to as well. And it wasn't until I went to Cyprus that I learned about what had happened between the Greeks and the Turks, because the island is split into two, isn't it? So,
Hmm.
so do you think when you travel, that does give you an education more about the history of the place, and it just gives you a deeper understanding of where you're going. So I do think it is important to know about the political side of a country as well, not just the landmarks and a tick list of what you want to see.
Yes, and I think it's really important for us to be mindful travelers. And that's
Yeah.
something I have enjoyed in your podcasts, Lisa, because you often just look beyond that, whether you're talking about animal welfare or sustainable travel or many, many other areas you look in. And that's something I think that we should be conscious of. I guess that I'm also, I am South African by birth, and your listeners can't see me, but I'm a white South African who grew up under apartheid. And so I guess, understanding or thinking about this dichotomy of a country having an incredibly brutal and oppressive
Mm.
history with great injustice, that's where I come from. That is a system that benefited me, and that's something that he thought about. And I guess that's something, if I go into a country where I know that there have been atrocities committed, I can not separate that, because it's important not to separate those things. It is important to recognize those things, but I can recognize that the individual person that I am speaking with who is showing me kindness, and I experienced a great deal of kindness in Turkey, or in Asia Minor, which is what it was called in the time that the Greek people lived there and had lived there for thousands and thousands of years. Um, I can still appreciate kindness and generosity, while also understanding that there are some terrible things that have happened in history.
Yes. I do think when you travel, you really, especially when you're alone as well, when you touched upon kindness, you really do see the kindness of strangers when you travel alone. And I think it restores your faith in humanity a bit more.
Ah, yes, and yes, I travel for me is an escape. It's a journey both to something and away from something.
Mm,
It is it's that it's a journey, it's a seizing of the passion of the moment, and taking on the world. And it's also an opportunity to leave some of our emotional baggage behind. And in fact, my first book, Unpacking for Greece, the reason I called it Unpacking for Greece was because it was about shedding emotional baggage. I mentioned
okay.
that there was a period in my life when I didn't travel. And that was because I had a very serious travel accident when I was in my 20s. No, I lie. I'm older than I thought. It was when I was in my 30s.
It happens to all of us, don't worry.
I had I was in a bus accident when I was traveling solo through Sri Lanka.
Mm.
The traffic in Sri Lanka is a little scary, and I was in a bus that drove head on into another bus, and was quite severely injured, and I still have some, slight disabilities as a result of that. Very slight, but
So
my body
sorry.
has not recovered. And oh, it's part of who we are. These are part of what make us who we are today. So I wouldn't now, I wouldn't swap it out. I wouldn't be who I was if that hadn't happened. But For about 10 years, without my even realizing it, I had stopped traveling. And the reason I say without realizing it, because I know that sounds crazy, but on paper, I was still traveling. I was going on cruises. I was traveling around Australia with my partner. I was flying back to South Africa to see my family. Um, I was traveling in kind of destinations in which I did not feel threatened at all.
Mm.
But I was, without realizing it, I had shrunk from the kind of adventurous travel that had always brought me this joy and which had been such an important part of my identity. And this trip to Greece that I write about in my first book was a conscious decision to reclaim that. And I decided not only to go to a country where I couldn't speak the language and wasn't familiar with the currency and had never been before, but also to travel by bus. And that was a big deal for me. It was hard.
Especially in Sri
But
Lanka.
that
Yeah.
Well, this trip now was to Greece. The Sri Lanka. I have not been back to Sri Lanka, and I really want to go back. Although that's going to be hard too. But that trip through Greece was about shedding the emotional baggage that had come with that accident, um, and also shedding some other emotional baggage which was that just before I flew, my sister, my older sister, she gave me, well, I actually have it here, although it's in a little plastic bag to protect it because I spill things a lot. I'm very clumsy. She gave this to me. Now, this is a little, very scuffed, very tiny little travel diary that my mother kept in 1978.
Oh, wow.
When she had gone to Greece. And I didn't remember that she'd gone to Greece. I didn't know that when I booked my trip. I was only 6 or 7 when she went. So my memory was, my mother went away with the church, and I didn't know any more than that really. She went on a pilgrimage with her church. She was very religious. She went to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, and to Jordan, and to the Vatican. And on their way back, they stopped just for very few days, 3 days, I think it was, or 4 days in Greece. But she kept this diary. Now, my mum and I had a really difficult relationship when I was growing up. And this diary, traveling through Greece with this diary, well, first of all, I have to say it frustrated me no end because my mother was not the kind of traveler I am, and she didn't record the kind of things that I would want to know about. Um, but something happened during that trip, and there was a moment where something switched in my mind. And for the first time, I recognized my mum, who had died when I was quite young. I recognized her as a woman, not as my mother, and as a woman who, in her 40s, had gone to a foreign country and encountered new things in the same way that I was doing in my 40s at that time. So between these two factors, the getting over my fear, well, I
Yeah.
won't say getting over my fear, but conquering my fear,
Mm.
and discovering my mother, this was a time of shedding that baggage, and that's why I called the book Unpacking for Greece.
Wow. So it's a really important journey in many different facets for you. What,
Yes, yes, it changed my life.
why did you choose Greece? Was it just a country that just came to you and you thought, yeah, this is the country that I want to explore?
I was having a supremely bad day at work, a very, very bad day at work. And I was sitting in my lunch hour and I was scrolling on my phone, as one does. I'd been wanting to travel for a long time. I had been in a resilience course, which was, this was to do with what was going on at my workplace at the time. And the presenter had said something that really resonated with me. He'd said, one day when you're old and you're looking back on your life, what is it that you will see that has made your life extraordinary? And he said, that thing it could be something different for everyone. For him and his wife, what made his life extraordinary was quitting these incredibly successful, high-powered careers and having a child. This is not something that would make my my life extraordinary. I have no children by choice, but I spent years thinking about that, what it could be that could make my life extraordinary, and I had decided it was getting back out and getting back into traveling, traveling solo around the world. But I every time I thought of somewhere to go, I had this huge mental block. I just couldn't think of where this place was that I needed to go. And that day at work, I was scrolling through my phone and I pulled up the World Heritage list, the list of UNESCO sites. And I scrolled through, and when I got to the G's and I saw Greece and I saw the sites, I just knew that was where I had to go. And a few weeks later, I was on the plane.
Wow. So it was like a calling, really.
It was a very strong and inexplicable calling
Yeah.
because I cannot overstate the the power of the emotion I have when I think of Greece now, and how that country resonated with me. I've traveled. I haven't traveled as much as you have, Lisa, but I have traveled to 33 countries. I've lived on 5 continents.
Wow.
I've
That's amazing.
gone to a lot of amazing places,
Yeah.
but I've never been called to write about any of those places. It was, I never felt I had the story that was worth the pages, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it was Greece that changed me. It made me a writer. It changed me in many ways, and it's inexplicable to me. I can tell you 100 reasons why Greece is a fabulous country to travel in, but the power of that connection is something that I'm still surprised at, even now.
Wow. It sounds really profound. And congratulations on your book. I love the title. This is your previous book, The Unpacking for Greece, that you were
Yes,
talking about earlier. Because you received
one
a
here.
lot of, fantastic. You received a lot of international media attention for that, didn't you? And you set many readers on their own solo adventure. What do you think is Greece's appeal for solo females?
I think it is a very easy country to travel in because it is a country that is so geared towards tourism. Um, the Greek economy rests to quite a large extent on its tourist industry, and that means it makes it easy for tourists to get around. And especially when you're a woman, and especially when you're traveling on your own, being able to get around fairly simply it's really important. You've got enough things to stress about without worrying about that. I was worried when I went to Greece. I was like, well, the alphabet is different. I don't speak Greek.
Yeah.
Well, at that stage, I didn't speak any Greek. Now I speak a few phrases. I was like, well, how will I know? I'll be in the metro, and how will I know where I'm going? How will I know where to get off? This was something that was a real concern for me. But then I went there and found that all the direction signs are in both Greek script and English script. It's these kinds of things that you will find all over Greece that make it really easy. I think it's also a very safe country. Um, I feel much safer walking around in Greece than I do in my home city. I would there are I'm not comfortable walking around in the dark where I live in Australia, but I would not be too phased in most of the areas I've been in Greece. And I'll take that with the caveat, as always. There are good neighborhoods and there are bad neighborhoods in every city, and to be alert and to be aware of what's around you. I'm not recommending that everyone go charging off alone at night, but I didn't feel as threatened there as I do in my own countries. And also, Greece is it's a country that has something to offer everyone.
Yeah.
And, that goes for whatever kind of traveler you are. You're solo, together, male, female. But it's a country where, if you're a hiker, you're going to find the Greece for you. If you're a beach goer, if you're a shopper, if you're a If you're somebody like me who's a complete geek for history and heritage sites and
Uh,
literary connections and mythology, you'll find the Greece for you. And that means that, yeah, it has massive appeal.
and what I love about your book is that you don't just virtually transport us to Greece, but the readers can also plan their own solo trips in your book. So tell us how that works.
Yeah, I wrote it as a travel companion. In fact, a lot of the memoir themes came out while I was writing. My initial intention was to write it as a kind of pure travelogue. Um, and so I described the travels in a way that if anyone wanted to replicate all or part of the itineraries in the two books, it would be very easy for them to do so. You know, I name most of the hotels that I stay in. I talk about how I found the long distance buses and what the difference is between the two bus terminals in Athens.
Right.
I talk about the sites that I visit. Importantly for me, to some extent in the first book and even more so in the second book, I talk about what I was reading while I was there because, you know, Greece is a land of stories
Mm.
like no other. And for me, there is no thrill as good as walking in the location of the book that I'm reading that day. So I read a lot of books on location and I've named those books. Um, I talked about kind of practical things that you will make your life in Greece much easier, you know, everything from what to expect with the toileting situation, which is a little different to what I was used to back home.
Very important.
Um, yeah, so these, if somebody wanted to, they could definitely replicate it. There are a couple of places I didn't name for privacy reasons of people I was writing about. But for the most part, it's all in there. One of the most fun experiences I've had was a reader who on Twitter live tweeted her experience of reading the book. And what I mean by that is with every kind of chapter she was reading, 2 or 3 times, she would take to Twitter and she would, you know, go to Google and she'd find images of the places she was reading about, the places I described in my book. And she was posting them on Twitter as she was reading. It was such fun. So that was a way that someone armchair traveled through my book.
Yeah,
And I couldn't
wow.
wait. I was like, she was tagging me in the posts. I'm at Journeys and Pages, and she was tagging me as she was going. I still remember her name is Sandra McKenna. She does it with a lot of books that she reads, and I love them even when they're not my books. She reads travel books a lot, and she posts not just location images, but if someone talks about a famous painting that they saw or a particular food that they ate, she goes off, she searches for these pictures and she, you know, every few hours while she reads, she posts some new pictures of her journey. And that was a lot of fun. But I have had people tell me, you know, I've spoken to some book clubs because I join in with book clubs around the world on Zoom. And I've spoken to some book clubs with women who have, um, and these have been especially older women who've said, you know, my whole life I've traveled with my husband, um, but now I want to go and do it myself, and that's a
Oh,
huge
I
thrill
love
for me.
it. Yeah, that's so rewarding, isn't it? That you've inspired or empowered these women to want to do that by themselves. So what's the difference? Because you've got another book out. So you've got the first one was Unpacking for Greece, and your brand new book is called Repacking for Greece, which was out in April, I believe.
Yep,
How
it's brand new.
congratulations
So
on doing a second one as well.
thank you. I actually wrote these two books in tandem. They were from my first 2 trips to Greece. Initially, I thought about them as one book, and I wrote the story covering 2 trips. And then as the story shaped itself over the years, it was taken about 8 years for these 2 books to come to fruition. I realized they were 2 separate stories. And if Unpacking for Greece was about shedding the emotional baggage, Repacking for Greece is about replenishment.
I
You
love
know,
it.
it was how I filled myself. Together, the two books, I think of them as a journey from a state of fear to a state of fulfillment. It was a falling in love with my own life again. And it was in the second book, the second trip to Greece, which I was a trip that took me by surprise. It was only 8 months after the first, and I was supposed to go to Canada, but some circumstances intervened, and I ended up going back to Greece instead. Um, this this story was about slowing down, abandoning anxiety, uh, learning to appreciate the moment instead of always chasing after the next experience. And so, yeah, it was about replenishment, and that's why I called it repacking.
Wow. So do you think there's a third book in you? Is a trilogy where you're going to go back to Greece and it will be a different aspect that you're looking at?
I
Or is it a
I
secret?
have a third book in mind.
Okay.
I have a very strong idea for the third book, and it will be for part of my most recent trip to Greece. I don't know yet if it's got the legs to stand, right? So I can't completely commit to it. And because I've been so busy with these last two, I haven't been able to get the words down on the page, but they're forming in my mind. You know, I'm mulling over them all the time. And the third book, if this one happens, will be called Packing for Crete. And it will be about a journey through Crete, but very much about a journey through the literary landscape of Crete.
Mhm.
There are amazing literary sites in Crete, and there will also be a focus, and this links to some, not all of the books that will feature, but there will be a focus also on what happened in Crete during the war, during the Second World War.
Interesting.
And what I discovered while I was there, linked to the books I was reading at the time. So those kind of three ideas: the idea of traveling through Crete, its World War II history, and its literature, and exactly how those three are going to mesh. I have some ideas, but I haven't got it fully formed yet. That I think that will be my third book, but we'll see. If it's not this one, it'll be something else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love the fact that you're a literary traveler as well. So you take the book with you and you're learning as you travel. And I think that's what I love about Greece is that there's so much history there and all the mythology as well. I
Mm,
personally went to Crete for a week solo and I didn't even scratch the surface of what
no.
Crete had to offer. And I hired a car and I stayed in two different areas, but it is a huge island to explore. Yeah. But
Yeah, I was there for 2 weeks. I could easily have been there for 3 months. You know, it
yeah.
is an incredible place, and I stayed in 5 different places. I was lucky to be there at Easter as well, which was amazing. Um, Crete Crete blew my mind. It is an incredible place on so many levels, and I
Mm.
can't wait to write about it.
What other places are your favourites in Greece that you would recommend for anyone listening that wanted to travel there alone?
I've stayed in about 25 places in Greece so far. And yeah, sure. I mean, some I like more than others, um, but I haven't found a place that hasn't enchanted me in some way yet.
Mhm.
The when people often ask me my three favorite places in Greece, and two of them come to mind straight away, and the third one I mix and match depending on my mood on the day. But two places I would absolutely recommend for people to go in Greece. The first is a place called Meteora. Now, we probably pronounce it, most English speakers will pronounce it Meteora.
Yeah.
Um, it is a landscape like something out of a fantasy novel. It is incredible. It is this lush green landscape. A lot of Greece is very dry, and isn't lush at all. It has a more of a harsh beauty.
Mm.
But the Matera region, you have this lush green landscape, And rising out of it are these massive, towering pinnacles of rock. They absolutely just tower over the landscape. And on top of these pinnacles of rock, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, people have built monasteries. In fact, it was more than 1,000 years ago that monks started going up onto these pillars of rock. At that stage, it was mainly sort of individual monks who went up as hermits. But with time, the monastic communities actually built monasteries on these rocks. And for a very long time, the only way to get up there, including getting your building materials up there or getting your people up there, was either to climb the rocks themselves, to scale these, sheer rock faces, or else to be pulled up in a net. This is how a lot of people got to the top. Nowadays, you can climb upstairs, lots and lots and lots and lots of steps. It is an incredible landscape because it has this combination of the natural heritage of this geological formation and the cultural heritage of the monks who've lived on these towers for thousands of years. It's a beautiful place, and I would absolutely recommend that people make the effort to go there. It's on the mainland. The second place I recommend, a lot of people are surprised that I do because they say, but it's so touristy. And I guess people who travel solo might also say, but it's for couples. It's Santorini. Santorini.
Interesting. Yeah.
You will never see another seascape like Santorini anywhere else in the world. And when I went to Greece, I didn't actually know very much about Greece, which is kind of embarrassing to admit. Maybe many of your readers know this, but I didn't. And I have spoken to other people who don't know this. We hear about Santorini and it's this wedding destination and the blue domes and the whitewashed churches. But what a lot of people don't know is that Santorini it's a submerged volcano. Those cliff edges that you see with all the white houses tumbling down, that's the inside of a volcano crater that plunges down deep into the ocean. So Santorini is actually not just one island. There's the main island, Thera, which most of us think of as Santorini. And there are a number of other smaller islands. And together, these are the edges of a volcano crater that are kind of poking up out of the sea.
Okay.
It is an astonishing sight. It is just incredible. And I don't think anyone should miss the chance to see it. There's heaps to do on Santorini if you're solo. There's no reason why you have to be part of a couple if you go there. So that's another place I recommend. And now I said those two are the two that I always say. I have to think of a third one. We've already talked about Crete. Let me think. For my third one, I think I will choose Nafplio. I don't think that's one I've used before.
Oh.
So Nafplio is a town on the Peloponnese Peninsula. It is just, in itself, for a start, it is just a lovely, picturesque old town. It's just beautiful. It's what you think of, the cobbled streets and the bougainvillea and, the historic houses and hotels, which are just very charming. It's also a town that has a lot of more recent history in the Greek struggle for independence from the Ottomans, the Turks. It has this amazing fort that you have to climb 1,000 steps to go to, although I believe you can cheat and take a bus. It's also within a short bus ride from 2 World Heritage sites. Well, 3 actually. The one is 2 sister sites. The one is Mycenae, or Mykonos, as it's called in Greece. And this you were talking about mythology. I mean, this is an incredible site because this was the kingdom of Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the very annoying and petulant and toxic king of all the Greeks that went to Troy to fight the Trojan War. and he was a despicable example of masculinity in many ways, and ended up being murdered by his wife in his bathtub when he returned home to Mycenae. His wife is my favorite figure from Greek mythology. Her name is Clytemnestra, and going to Mycenae and like walking in the places where these characters, if they were real, these characters walked, is a great experience. And there's another World Heritage site called Epidavros, which is also in that region you can get to by bus, which has an amazing theatre. And a lot of travelers only see the theatre. But if you step a little bit further, you just go kind of like 5 minutes walk further into the site, you get Asclepion. And the Asclepia are the ancient healing sites. So they were the places that people went who were sick or unwell in some way, and received, well, they received all sorts of therapies, from water therapy to diet to medicine to even surgery. But while all of those things might be happening, the kind of the story of the place is that it was a miraculous healing that was visited upon the patients in a dream from the god Apollo. So yeah, there's a lot to see around there.
Fascinating places. Yeah, a couple of places that I wouldn't think that you would say. Yeah, interesting.
Everyone is surprised when I say Santorini, because I do so enjoy getting away from the main tourist sites. But you can still get away, you can. Something that I have discovered about the kind of tourist track is that you can often just walk 2 or 3 minutes, literally, away from a main tourist site, and you can be by yourself. So if you're in Athens and you go to the Acropolis and you go to see the Parthenon, which, I think everyone should do at least once if they can get there. It's an incredible site in our, world history and visually, and, don't miss it. But you're going to be there with thousands and thousands and thousands of other people. You can walk 6 or 7 minutes from there, and you can be at the Pnyx, which is the birthplace of democracy. Not exactly democracy as we think of it today, and certainly not democracy for the women who lived in Athenian society, because a lot of people forget just how oppressed women were in Athens in those days. It was extreme. You can be at the Pnyx, and chances are there will be no one there with you. And you can turn around and look, and you can see the Acropolis, and you can see that it's crawling with people, and yet you're alone in this site. So I think while it can be disheartening to be stuck with all those people all the time, you don't need to avoid, kind of entire islands or entire cities because of this, because you can have that quick taste of the tourist site, because there's a reason people want to go there, right? But then you can just walk a little bit away and you can make your own unique travel experiences.
That's really great advice. And earlier you were saying about taking the buses to get around. Is that the best way to get around? Obviously, if you're going between islands, the ferries are pretty good as well, aren't they? You can island hop around the groups of islands, which I did not realise how many islands there were until I was looking at island hopping, and then I realised, okay, there's the Saronic Islands you can travel around independently with boats, but to get to some of the other islands that are a bit further out, you need to take a plane. But I guess the buses are a really good local experience as well to get around the country.
And even a long distance experience, they're good. The buses tend to be very good, very good new vehicles, good, they go a lot of places. I prefer myself, in general, I prefer to travel by train rather than bus. I love train travel. It's one of my favorite activities.
Yeah.
But the train service isn't great in Greece. There are places you can get to by train, and I have traveled long distance by train in Greece. I went to Meteora by train. But the buses they're a very good service. They were challenging for me. They were very challenging for me because I had this fear, and there were some experiences in the bus, that I'd be the only person in the bus reaching for my seatbelt, right? But, there was once where I reached for my seatbelt and gave it a little tug and ended up with the whole seatbelt mechanism in my hands, and it wasn't actually attached to anything. I had another experience with a bus driver that was pretty much steering with his elbows while he was reading his travel manifest. So it was a little challenging for me.
Yeah.
But in terms of the network and the vehicles and so on, it's very good. And the
Okay.
ferries are great. Do try and go on a ferry if you can. Ferry travel is an experience in Greece. I love it so much. I don't know how they do the transfers so quickly when those massive ferries pull into the islands, and you're waiting and you've got to go, go, go. You get in there and the ferry is pulling away from the port before you've even made it to your seat. It's quite something.
And did you meet many other people? I know that you were talking about having local experiences. Did you see many other solo travelers there?
Look, there are heaps of travelers there, and it would be very easy to connect with other travelers. Um, I am an extreme introvert. People don't believe that when they hear how much I talk, but I actually
Yeah,
am an
it
extreme
surprises
introvert.
me. Yeah.
I find that the connections that I make when I travel, and which I really value, tend to be with the waiters, the people who work in my hotel. I'll spend a lot of time standing at the reception desk chatting when they've got some downtime. Those are, I mean, I'm still friends with, on Facebook, and, they've even helped me with some aspects of my books and so on, with a tour guide that I met on Corfu. Fanny, I'll give her a shout out. She's lovely. Um, I'm friends with the woman who ran the accommodation I stayed in on Santorini, and I went back there. I took Adam, my partner, there on the last. Eventually, I had to let him come to Greece with me, right? It was getting
Only
awkward.
fair.
So when we went back to Santorini, because I took him there because I wanted him to see that seascape as well, we stayed in the same place, and Fortini has become a real friend. So I do tend to interact more with the people I meet that are working there than with the travelers. But there are plenty of opportunities to connect with travelers.
And what would you say to someone who wants to go to Greece alone but is feeling a bit intrepid about going?
I guess I'd ask them why they were intrepid about going. I mean, were they nervous about travel in general by themselves? Or is it specifically Greece? And what is it that they're afraid of? For example, some people are, like I said, I was worried I wouldn't be able to find my way around because I didn't think that I'd be able to read signs because they wouldn't be in letters in an alphabet that I could recognize. And I found that wasn't the case. Some people are nervous about the ferries. I've heard people say, "Oh, the ferries are not safe, and my suitcases are going to be stolen, and this is just not going to be a good way for me to travel." Other people have other fears or other concerns, and so I'd ask them what it was that was worrying them, and I think that in most cases I would be able to allay those fears because I really have found Greece an incredibly easy country to travel in.
That's really reassuring, and I hope that that's inspired. I'm sure that has inspired someone listening who now will book that flight to Greece. So before we
I
start
hope
wrapping
so.
up, yeah, before we start wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I'd actually like to share some exciting news. It's exciting for me, which is my next trip. I've got 2 trips planned. One is to Greece next year. but I'm going. So haven't actually mentioned the kind of premise of the second book, Repacking for Greece, and the
Yes.
reason I ended up back in Greece after such a short period of time. I had been intending to travel in Canada to go and visit my nephew who was living there and to meet the woman that he'd fallen in love with. My nephews and nieces, I don't have children of my own, and my nephews and nieces I'm very close with them, and particularly three of them that I lived with them for a while. And yes, I was excited about going and visiting Christopher. And I ended up having, being embroiled in a visa nightmare of note. And the reason for that was, I'm South African by birth. I live in Australia. And when I was in South Africa in the 1980s and 1990s, I was a political activist. And that was around the time that Nelson Mandela was released. And, that was it was a great moment, but it was also a great PR exercise for the apartheid government because there were a lot of terrible things still happening, including a lot of other political prisoners who were still in jail. And there were many of us who were campaigning to get them out. And it was urgent because, some of them were on hunger strike. It was critical. And in that period, I was arrested a few times. And, that was a lifetime ago. But when I wanted to apply for this visa, they asked the question, have you ever been arrested? And I'm very honest. So I said yes. And that sent me down this path of having to get reams of documentation that was, in some cases, difficult and time consuming to get intercontinentally, and in other cases just didn't exist. And this process went on for months. And I ended up having to cancel my trip to Canada. The sad thing was that the visa actually came through a couple of days after I canceled the trip. But
Mm-hmm.
for various reasons, I had to cancel the trip, including the fact at that stage I don't use travel agents now, but at that stage I was still using a travel agent. And my travel agent, who knew the whole backstory and was going to do the cancellation, I'd given her the heads up. She was on alert. She was due to give birth at any minute. Her due date was the same as my travel date. And I'm actually going to be meeting her in person for the first time next week when she comes to my book launch. But the visa didn't come through in time, and I ended up back in Greece. Now, what I'm excited about now is that I've just got my visa to go to Canada. It just came through a few weeks ago.
Oh,
And I
fantastic.
am now going to go and see my nephew and
Oh,
his now wife. She has married him. I have met them before in other countries, but I've never been able to see them in their home in Canada. So I'm really excited about
oh,
that.
great. Maybe it's a case of timing. So that's great that you're going to be going there. So give us a synopsis of your second book and also where we can find both of your books, Unpacking for Greece and Repacking for Greece.
So both books start with they're both divided into 3 sections, and the start is a 2-chapter section that is not set in Greece. It is, I believe, when we travel, we take ourselves with us, so everything that made us who we are travels with us to Greece. So the first book, this beginning section, is about the accident in Sri Lanka, and it then goes on to be an itinerary that travels through Greece. The second book starts with some memories of living in South Africa in the late 20th century, and then once again goes on to travel through Greece, through 11 destinations in Greece. And in terms of where you can find them, well, pretty much anywhere that you buy books. So you can get them at the usual online suspects. You can buy them from Amazon. I know you're in Dubai. I bought copies of the book for the people who helped me in Sri Lanka who are living in
Oh,
Dubai, and sent them to them there. So, all the kind of online retailers, but you should also be able to order them from your neighborhood bookstore. They might not have it on the shelf, but they'll be able to order it in. And I always say as well, don't forget libraries. I'm so keen to get my book into libraries. It's not, for me, it's not about the couple of dollars I make off a sale. It's about getting the books into the hands of readers. So a lot of people don't know that libraries will often order a book in for you if you want one. So, yeah, please go into your libraries and ask them to order one of these 2 books.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's a really good idea. So pop into your local library. And congratulations on your book launch next week, I think you said. I hope that all goes really
Yes.
well.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for talking to me about solo travel and also all your experiences in Greece. And I wish you every success in the future, Sally.
Thank you, Lisa.
And you can find out more about Sally and her 2 books on Greece at sallyjanesmith.com. I'll be back next week. In the meantime, safe travels.
Thanks for listening to our Girl About the Globe podcast, making solo travel easier for you. Find everything that you need for your solo travels at girlabouttheglobe.com, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.